One of the most revered wrestling promotions ever, it may be, but revisiting ECW in 2018 is a weird experience. Cannibalized by decades of nostalgia trips, a once special promotion celebrated for its gritty innovation has had its guts exposed. ECW was a moment in time. Living that moment over and over again brings into focus that for the self-styled nirvana of professional wrestling, there was a lot of Godsmack in its bowels. Still, ECW's legacy is assured with the long-term absorbing storytelling, wild revolutionary angles, and unique cast just about transcending its retrospective ugliness. ECW survived and thrived through such a surge of DIY creativity that when famous names were parachuted in, they were hardly defined by, nor did they define the promotion. And here they are. I'm Andy for What Culture Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers you totally forgot worked for ECW. Number 10. Sid. Sid entered ECW as he entered most promotions, blitzing his way through unfortunate souls in ghoulishly entertaining short-round squash matches. Both performer and promotion were past their primes, but Sid in ECW was still kind of fun. Debuting at Guilty as Charged, he actually battered poor John Cronus and his neck, putting the daft bugger through a table, and stuck around for 4 months feuding with the likes of the Dudleys, Skull Von Crush, and Just Incredible. And yet somehow Sid was safer in the world of barbed wire and unprotected chair shots than he was in WCW, where he ended up snapping his fibula in two after an ill-advised top rope big boot. Gross. Number 9. Doink. Fired from WWF in 1993, Doink resurfaced in ECW to unanimous rejection, with the Philly crowd associating him with Vince McMahon's overt goofiness. Targeted by trademark crowd viciousness, Doink was immediately jobbed to 911, a guy used to kill off various ECW acts, before Doink was literally born again as a character pitched to rage against mainstream audiences. The development was a sad extension of the performer himself. Though nuanced, he lacked the discipline required to pull this imaginative idea off, and Born Again quickly flopped. Number 8. Arn Anderson. When WCW ripped off ECW's When Worlds Collide event name in 1994, Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton were parachuted into the Northeast as an apologetic lawsuit-diffusing gesture. Although he was just passing through, Arn wasn't happy with his match with Terry Funk against Sabu and Eaton, claiming that Funk and Sabu did what, well, Funk and Sabu did, murder each other with weapons. Feeling sabotaged, Anderson slapped Eaton into a headlock and wrestled a bare-bones Southern-style wrestling match in protest before getting the hell out of there. Number 7. Scott Hall. Born from mutual depression, Scott Hall and ECW was not a mutually beneficial relationship, while Paul Heyman does claim he didn't pay Hall a single cent for his services. The bad guy throwing his toothpick at the camera was the only athletic feat he actually performed, as he mugged the crowd, refused to sell for Little Guido, and was then squashed by Sal E. Graziano. Hall apparently took the gig to demonstrate to former employers WCW that he was on his quote-unquote best behaviour. But while the former Razor Ramon oozed charisma at his peak, the only thing oozing out of Hall in ECW was the last of his fun. Number 6. Marty Jannetty. The original Party Marty arrived in ECW after spending much of the 90s in and out of the WWF, having endured troubles with Law and Order. Paul Heyman, in his creative pomp, recognised Jannetty's power as a sympathetic babyface and had him challenge for the ECW Championship more than once, making for an astute contender. He represented Heyman's approach when using nomadic big two stars well. Paul didn't propel them into positions at the top of the card, instead refusing short-term temptation in order to safeguard his promotion's DIY aura, accentuate the positives and hide the negatives. Number 5. Jake Roberts. Jake the Snake once famously said, "I don't mind making a large sum of money for 30 seconds work," and he wasn't exaggerating. He entered ECW in 1997 before almost immediately exiting, having planted everyone in sight with DDTs and extremely sloppy clotheslines. A marginally longer stint followed the next year, during which he actually worked a full match in November to Remember 1998, but he was long past his peak, and unfortunately, opponent Jack Victory was left to do all the bumping. Number 4. Jim Neidhart. In late 1993, Stu Hart put in a favour to Paul Heyman on behalf of the Anvil, and thus he went to a non-finish against the Sandman in a collector's edition bout at November to Remember 1993. Anvil's stint in the Blood and Guts promotion hardly shaped his subsequent WWE runs. After turning on Bret Hart at SummerSlam 94, Neidhart scuppered his new gig, but did return in 1996 as Who. Redemption eventually came through a 1997 Hart Foundation resurgence, but Anvil's ECW flirtation was nothing. Number 3. Stan Hansen. The legendary half-blind brawling maniac dropped into ECW between All Japan tours to inform his hardcore legacy, teaming with Terry Funk to wage war against Abdullah the Butcher and Kevin Sullivan. After that, he didn't do much else beyond choking Todd Gordon and working a non-finish with Jimmy Snuka, but it's clear even from that barely watchable grain-speckled footage that Hansen and ECW were a match made in hardcore heaven. It's not difficult to picture an awesome alternate timeline of Hansen running wild in Heyman's promotion for many years, but sadly, All Japan simply paid more. Number 2. The Steiner brothers. Steve Austin experimented with his act in ECW. His searing anti-WCW promos were the wellspring of his incredibly successful Stone Cold act in WWF. Less famously, Scott Steiner also used the ruleless confines of Paul Heyman's promotion as the foundation of his awesome Big Poppa Pump singles run. The delightfully insane Steiner kicked things off with an involuntarily funny backstage promo in 1995, during which he berated Johnny B. Bad and Shawn Michaels for being feminine. In the ring, him and Brother Rick only briefly wowed bloodthirsty Philadelphians with their proto-Suplex City style, though they did have a rather wonderful battle with Chris Benoit and Too Cold Scorpio. And number 1, King Kong Bundy. Todd Gordon famously said of Bundy's appearance at November to Remember 1993 that he wanted the work, but he didn't want to work. Bundy refused to job that night, opting to absorb very little offense before turning on partner Terry Funk to allow Sabu to roll Funk up and take his TV title. That was the extent of Bundy's involvement. He came, saw, and phoned it in. Having arrived in the land of Extreme as a mystery partner, Bundy, in an even bigger mystery, was rehired by the WWF to put The Undertaker over at WrestleMania. It represented the nadir of Taker's old Monster of the Week art, which was soon aborted to make way for the Dead Man. Awesome gimmick, awesome wrestler. So cheers, Bundy, and if you ever fancy coming back now, there's a guy called Finn Balor who could really do with hitting his lowest ebb.